Taming the tongue is a test of or a mark of spiritual maturity. James indicates that we all sin, we all stumble in multiple ways. We all make many mistakes, as it's rendered in the NRSV. That being true, James states in hypothetical fashion, if an individual does not stumble in that which she or he says, then this person will be truly mature, truly complete. Yes, this word teleos is also rendered perfect, but the idea is not that we would be sinless, it's that we would not stumble or sin through speech. We would be mature. So James figures, he reckons, that if a person can control the tongue, then they can keep their whole body under check, under reins. They can control their entire self. That is to say, if one does not stumble in that which they speak, then there is a good chance that they will not sin in deeds, for both word and deed derive from the heart. If one's heart is pure, James reasons, one's speech will also be pure. You say, you have conveniently skipped over 3:1. What would you like to do with that, teacher? Why is it that James says that those who teach will incur a stricter judgment? Now, to be certain, influence is one reason. In Matthew's gospel, it says that you ought not lead one of these little ones astray, for it would be better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck and to be thrown into the sea. To be certain, that is a grisly judgment for those who would lead someone down a slippery spiritual slope. Having said that, I gather that what James is driving at here is this. Those who teach talk a lot. The more you talk, the greater the tendency is to stumble in that which you say. And that's why James is suggesting, don't be first in line to teach, like some apparently in these congregations were, because remember, in Hebrew culture, to be a rabbi was to be at the top of the social status chain. You know, there was a day, I know this is going to surprise you, that teachers were respected. I know, I understand. And it was in this day. And James says, not let many of you seek to become teachers, for in so doing, you will be susceptible to stumble because you're going to talk a lot. So James says, taming the tongue is in fact a mark of spiritual maturity. James goes on to say, as he develops this remarkable passage, whereby he creates a powerful analogy where the tongue, as it were, becomes a microcosm of the person. He says that taming the tongue is not only a mark or a test of spiritual maturity, but taming the tongue is a necessity. And the reason is because the tongue can wield a disproportionate amount of power. Relative to its size, it packs a punch. And James goes on to offer no less than 3 analogies of a smaller thing controlling a larger thing. To begin, James says that with guidance, a bit can control a horse. We put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, and in so doing, we guide their whole bodies. That is, in theory, and when I'm not the one who has the mount. I have ridden horses on 4 occasions and have peeled my pride off the ground on 3. That's not a very good batting average. The most remarkable, harrowing, and humbling experience was the time that I was in the Colorado mountains. I was with my friend. He had invited me up to move a little brush. In other words, he had invited me up for free labor. But on this one afternoon, there was some free time, and he suggested that we ride the horses through the forest, which sounded like all that and a little bit more. Now, I must confess I was kind of an urban kiddo, and I had shorts and tennis shoes on, but so it was. And so he decides to put me on his horse named Buck. This did not go well. I'll tell the story. So, I get on Buck, and Buck and I go up the trail, and Dawson says, "Now, why don't you take him up a little further?" And so I do. And then I thought, I think I've gone up far enough. And so I was learning to turn the horse, and when I did, Buck took off like buckshot. And here I am now, my tennis shoes out of the stirrups, and I am holding on to these reins for dear life. Pastor, my prayer life was better in those moments. Oh, dear God, Jesus, help me. Dawson, stop Buck. And then Dawson comes over and says, "How you doing?" I said, "Well, I think I'm okay. I think the only thing really wounded is my pride." So, ideally, bits control horses. Ideally, rudders control ships. These big ships that can be blown along by winds with these small little rudders can be led safely into shore. And as we've learned from Kurt Kaiser, it only takes a spark to get a fire going, right? Just this little spark can set aflame a fellowship, yes, and a forest. What is a bit to a horse and a rudder to a ship and a spark to a forest is, in fact, the tongue to the body. Built-in analogies, which is very convenient for professors who are illustratively challenged. That's the reason I've really chosen James, Steve. So we see that James says the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. So why do we tame the tongue? Because it's a mark of spiritual maturity. The goal of the Christian life is to be pressed into the likeness and conformity of Jesus Christ. If we are to be like Jesus, we need to measure our words wisely, because one day Matthew tells us that we will give an account for every idle word spoken. So at the final assize, we need to make sure that we were wise with our words. Taming the tongue is a mark of spiritual maturity. Taming the tongue is a necessity, because if we're not careful, our tongue can wag ourselves. Thirdly, we see in this text before us that taming the tongue is seemingly a possibility. At least it is by way of analogy. Look with me at verse 7. "For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by human species." Lions and tigers and bears, oh my. We go to SeaWorld, we see Shamu, and we go ooh and ah, and Shamu seems somewhat tamed. We see the falcons land on the arm of the one tending to the falcon, and we say, wow. We see lions and elephants and the likes at circus, and we go, that's incredible. So we say that if they can tame that, then can't we tame this? But so frequently the answer is no. Although it would seem a possibility by way of analogy, taming the tongue requires acknowledging our own depravity, our own propensity to sin. Let's look at verse 6. The tongue is a fire. It's placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body.